Well, welcome back into the Mid-Norfolk garden. I've been picking over these citrus trees this evening. It's very important to keep on top of any pests that develop. These trees have been out since very early this season. End of April we managed to bring these out. The spring came early here in Norfolk and they've grown away really well. We've been watering and feeding very regularly, and the new growth and fresh fruit that's set on these trees is really very pleasing. But we have got a few little pest problems on this one. I'm going to show you an example of some scale insects here. Now there you can see a group of 2 of them, and further up, I don't know whether I can get this into focus. Let's see if I can. There, just that little one. Place to look for these is usually, these are on the upper surface of the leaf, but quite often you will get them on the undersurface and ribs. I'm going to try and focus on this little group. There we go. By this time of year, if your citrus trees have been outside, these little pests have usually got quite a tan on them. Now the only way to get rid of these is to squish them, I'm afraid. Get a thumbnail on them and just work them away and squash the poor little buggers. It's got to be done. If you don't do this, they will reproduce very quickly and really suck the vigour out of your citrus trees very quickly. I've seen so many examples of people trying to grow citrus and failing because these little pests have just overwhelmed the lemon or orange tree, and people haven't realised what they are or have tried to rely on pesticides to try and control them. A good clue as to whether you've got any pest disease on a citrus tree that's growing outside is to have a look down on the stem and look for any ant activity going up and down. Let's see if I can show you an example of what I mean. Here we go, little trail of, in this case, black ants. Not a whole lot of them, but they're running up and down the stem of the tree, making their way across the compost. And they can give you a clue, an indication that there are some pests active on the branches somewhere in this bush, because they'll only come and go up onto the leaves if they are milking either aphids or the scale insects, because it's the sweet discharge of those bugs that they're looking for. This tree's grown really well. We've got some really nice fresh growth on this tree, and it's still showing some flower, although it hasn't set very much fresh fruit. It was a difficult year for these trees last year, and they're really having a much better time of it now and making up for that, putting a lot of leaf growth on. I think they were weakened by last year's very poor summer here, which was wet, dark and not too much sun. They're loving it here now. They're getting absolutely baked. We've got them in, I think it's 14-inch large terracottas. We've top dressed them this year with some spent mushroom compost, which they seem to be really enjoying. We're keeping them much moister this year because of the heat than we would normally, giving them a really good drenching and feeding them regularly, once a week at least, with a citrus specific plant food, which is available from most nurseries, and they are absolutely loving it. We've got 4 trees that we bring out onto this aspect each year. They're all lemons, but they're all slightly different varieties. We have just bought them along the way. They weren't named varieties, and that's quite often the way. If you go to a garden centre or a market, you'll find a generically labelled citrus lemon, but it's very unlikely, unless you pick them up from a specialist grower, to have the actual variety. Commonest one being Mayer's lemon. We've probably got that in one of these, but they're all different sizes and shapes. The smaller ones were actually purchased as wraparound, what I call wraparound trees, almost vines put onto frames and curled around and sold after they'd put on a rapid amount of growth and were carrying some fruit. We've gradually removed the framework and grown them into sort of semi-standard bushes here, and these are fruiting very well. This tree's got a lot less growth on it, much less vigorous. You can see we've got some dieback on here. Suggests it probably needs podding on or some good feed, but it's carrying a good crop of lemons from the previous season. And that's sometimes the way. The less vigorous tree, the less leaf, carries some of your best fruit, and this has sat an awful lot of fruit on here, so need to make sure that this doesn't dry out at any stage. You want the compost to dry nicely in between waterings, but then to really saturate it and get it nice and wet so it's coming out the bottom of the pot. Don't leave them sat in water, make sure they're on good drainage. We've got them here on dry gravel, which is ideal. But one other problem that we have encountered, and just a tip for you, if you are growing them outside on a patio in a dry area, do check the underside of the pots, because again we have problems here with ant nests, and the ants love nothing better than to get in a dry area in the compost and form a nest. They'll burrow around, excavate large areas within your pot, which will cause damage to your roots, so just be aware and watch out for any ant nest developing. Just oyster the pots open. By that I mean just have a look under them, and the clue there, you can see we've got an active ant's nest in there with the soil being excavated, but I've put some ant powder in the centre portion to make sure that they're not active in the actual compost in the pot. So a couple of tips there: look out for ants. 2 causes of ants going around in your bushes is going to be either a nest in the pot, or they're feeding on some aphids or scale insects that are on the lemon trees, so make sure that you're on top of your aphids, feeding and watering regularly, and hopefully you enjoy a bumper crop of lemons over the coming 18 months as a result.